Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Mark Earshai, and I'm very excited to be the director of the Odyssey Arts and presenting this first event in the Odyssey Institute series, a conversation with Dr. Michael Nickens. We'll get started in just a moment, but I'd like to first thank you all for being here. I'd also like to mention that we do have a number of upcoming events. Please make sure you check them out on our website at odyssey-arts.org. Our next event is on August 18th. It's the first event of the Odyssey Festival series with myself and artist Milad Yousefi, an Afghan artist and painter. We're very excited to present both of us on August 18th at 4 p.m. live on Facebook at Odyssey Arts. For today, we're very excited to present Dr. Michael Nickens and moderating Munit Mesfin. A little bit about them, as you saw in the opening slides, Dr. Michael Nickens is the director of Campus Life Ensembles and collaborative arts leader of The Green Machine at George Mason University. The Green Machine was voted in 2015 as the #1 pep band in basketball by the NCAA. He is an innovative arts director and educator within the George Mason community. He's received a number of awards for his teaching and innovation and leadership in the field. Munit Mesfin is an Ethiopian-American singer-songwriter who changed the contemporary Ethiopian music scene with her duet with Munit and Jorg. She uses arts integration to teach African history, language, and culture all across the United States, including in her current position as teaching artist with Wolf Trap Arts. They are both educators, artists, and boundary-breaking individuals who seek to diversify the world around them through the inclusion of other perspectives, identities, and backgrounds. We're so lucky and really overjoyed to have them both with us. Thank you, Munit and Doc, for being with us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Of course, a pleasure. And with that, Munit, I'll let you take it away. Thanks again.
My pleasure. Good morning, everybody that is watching on Facebook, and good morning to you, Doc Nix.
Good
I'm
morning.
thinking that'd be the best way to call you.
That's perfect.
I was very excited to be here with you all to have this conversation on identity and authentic experiences in U.S. music schools. I think you probably are one of the best people to have a conversation about this issue since you've experienced so many institutions of music education, both as a student, as an educator, just from your own perspective, Manhattan School of Music, Yale University, University of Michigan, and you've taught in many different other institutions. You've created groups, you've done a lot around what is music and education. And I think in terms of also your position within George Mason, working with the diversity committee as its chair and as the part of the graduate committee within the School of Performing and Visual Arts, all of these things, I think, place you in the perfect position to talk to us a little bit about what it has meant to you and what it means to be fully present as your authentic self in all of these realms. So the first question to you on this big and giant topic would be, what does authenticity mean to you in the context of this discussion around music education? That would be the first question. But before we get into that answer, I just have to tell you, watching you guys playing Rage Against the Machine, I mean, I heard you talk about it, and then I'm like, all right, I gotta watch this. So I clicked on that play button, and it was mind blowing, goosebumps everywhere. And the comments, I mean, people want to go to George Mason because of you. So that's also something to be said. But really, truly, in this moment, I just want to say congratulations. That was awesome.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm glad you enjoyed it.
And yes, please tell us a little bit about what authenticity means and define it in the context of this conversation.
I love thinking about words like genuine and maybe self-aware is part of the mix. One of the reasons why the opportunity to work at George Mason was so attractive to me is because I grew up 30 minutes away from campus. My mother still lives in the same house she brought me home from the hospital to, and my family and extended family are here. Cousins and uncles and aunts and all sorts of connections. My friends that I even grew up with, and when I was looking to study music, especially after excuse me, after high school, George Mason was not at a place that it was on my radar at the time. It's a young university. Only became a freestanding 4-year institution in 1972. So everything is being built in real time around us, and we often talk about we're flying a plane that we're building at the same time, and we're doing it successfully. But if you rewind to the early '90s, when I'm looking at a place to study after high school, it just wasn't in a place that was attractive to me at the time. But that also kind of bothered me because this is Washington D.C. area. I mean, we can look across the country, all these different very strong places to study music, and I'm not saying that there isn't a place in D.C., but particularly thinking about the Northern Virginia, just the way that it's exploded population-wise, and how diverse that population is, how strong the music programs are, especially in the public high schools. I'm sure in many of the private schools too. I just have so much more experience with the public schools that I can speak about that more clearly. But I just didn't understand at that time why we didn't have a go-to, center of gravity of teaching music. And then I go to school and I learn whatever I learned wherever I was, and then coming back, I understand it takes time to build that. It just takes time, and the resources build up over time, and to have a true representative ecosystem, especially the kind we're trying to talk about now in 2020, taking into account who the population, who's coming to Mason, locally, who's coming to Mason regionally, who are we attractive across the nation, across the globe, in order to truly be providing all the opportunities that are logical and that we should be aspiring to. It's going to take us time to build up all the ways we do that, particularly because we need people who have the mindset that want to do that kind of work, and then are able to do that kind of work, and able to because they have had experiences and can bring that into the mix, able to because they have the kind of open mind that can recognize when something comes to them that maybe they don't recognize, but they still can have an impactful interaction with it, regardless of experience. And then also just how powerful the credential is. So it's one thing for us to talk about, this is the Washington D.C. area, there should be go-go in the music schools, but without having someone who can both navigate go-go and higher ed, and how strong the credential is when it comes to that, it's just going to take us time to truly put that together in a way that will have staying power, and that will be able to be fluent in all the things necessary to navigate all of that. But it's not that we have to wait until the conditions are perfect. As always, we just have to go with what's in front of us and do the best we can, and really truly figure out, be committed to what the best we can is. So all that to say, I wanted to come to Mason because I wanted to build the program that I wish I had had 20 years prior. And what a great way to find my way in. I fell in love with marching band in high school, and found out really quickly how flexible that sort of mode of expression is, because the strongest bands that I had heard, the first time I heard the James Madison University Marching Royal Dukes, I was blown away. The care and craft that they put into it, the passion. But what's really strong, especially in hindsight, the variety of the repertoire, pop music and opera and film scores and jazz and just anything you could think of, they would find a way to perform it. And so you would have Chicago right next to Bizet, right next to Dvorak, right next to James Bond, on and on and on, spirituals and gospel, and so it showed that without the restraints of an expectation of what should be performed. They just really pushed the boundaries and mixed it all up. So coming up and watching that and listening to that, and also having my own teachers. I mean, I was just thinking recently, my middle school band director, and the first time we put something fun together was we played Wipeout and did a drum set feature with this concert band, and then we played the theme to Ghostbusters and Batman and just all sorts of really fun things. I mean, I'm in 8th grade and I'm playing Prince's Bat Dance on stage, and just what a fun and great opportunity that was. But then right next to that, we were playing Mozart and Sousa, just getting a really great wide range of things. But I was proud of myself, for instance, for whatever we did with Mozart, and interested in it and liked it, and continue to be a fan of Mozart. But I really feel like the way I was connected to playing Ray Parker Jr. and Prince, it just had a different. I guess like as a 7th and 8th grader, it was my first taste of being seen by a teacher in a cultural way that and it's not that we were just playing these pieces in class. We were putting them on the stage for performances. And particularly I remember with Wipeout, we would have dueling drum sets even, and how much the whole school would just go nuts because they were cheering for their friend and seeing something that was cool and hip, and we were able to provide that. So by the time I got to marching band, then it's nothing but that. We're playing Duke Ellington charts and Broadway tunes and New Orleans jazz and all kinds of big band and pop tunes in the bleachers for football games. And then as I got more interested in marching band across the nation, you start to find how different it is regionally. You find how different it is with the identity of the school, and everyone's doing really great work. And then as time goes on, you start to see the mix, and everyone's borrowing from everyone else, and then I just see this as an emerging thing that isn't trying to be so worried about. It honors the past traditions, absolutely, but it prides itself on pushing and being on the cutting edge. And I'm not saying that other modes of music making don't do that, but I just love the way marching band does it. And how marching band also has an aspect to it where it's like it shows the wide variety of the spectrum of the common observer accidentally found the band because they were at a festival, at a parade, at a sporting event, and they were just exposed to it because it was there. And then there's the other end of the highfalutin marching competition, and people travel across the country and buy hotel rooms and tickets to go hear, Drum Corps International World Championships or the Battle of the Bands down in Atlanta or something like that. And these are these like major cultural events, and marching band at kind of the highest. The Rose Bowl parade is another one, Macy's parade, those kinds of things. So people really going out of their way to hear the best of the best and kind of what's there. And so I love that it spans that entire thing. I can also mention all of the military bands who have all sorts of ceremonies and things that they do as well, and then mix up with everything I was just mentioning. And those are some of the top world-class musicians who are marching in a parade, doing some sort of protocol ceremony, something like that. So it gives us a chance to meet a very wide range of people right where they are, and try to, with one thing, provide for everybody. And like I said, obviously it's different in different settings and can have different focus, but we get to have all those experiences, and so I've just very much enjoyed that. And so that's the kind of thing I'm trying to build at George Mason.
That's awesome. I mean, you hit on a lot of amazing points, because even watching, like I said, the Rage Against the Machine situation with the Green Machine, I was struck by it is really the public. It's a huge public face, because you're in the media, you're in those bleachers with thousands of people watching you. The band itself is huge in size, in terms of just the composition of the kids that were in it. And you could sense from the energy of the music, the way that it translates to people across the board. And in the comments, I was really, again, struck by, I wish I had a teacher like this, the cane, the cane that you had with you, the pimp cane. If anybody's watching this, you have to watch this. And how he was like, you deserved it. Why didn't I go to this university? Why can't I go to this university? And all of those things kind of, again, pull on some of the things that you mentioned, which is, again, authenticity. What does it mean? Who does it reach? Who does it welcome? Who does it involve? Who does it not welcome? And I think the point that you also made about how George Mason is building itself and how you're building something that you wish you had. I guess that leads to my second question, which is, were you able to bring your full self within whatever you consider your knowledge of self as a teenager going to music schools and then later on in your 20s, with your sense of whatever the myriad of identities is? Did you feel like you had an authentic experience in the music schools that you went through? And what does that actually even mean? Because I think music schools, they intimidate some people and they don't intimidate others. Who does it intimidate and why is something, that kind of goes into what kind of experience do you have? What's your class background situation, your economic wherewithal? What kind of musical education did you have through there? Because you mentioned public schools. There are great music programs here in the Northern Virginia area. Maybe others don't. Maybe some of the people went through churches, so they didn't necessarily have an exactly academic experience with music. But in terms of all of those backgrounds that people are coming with, you were probably in the luckier group of folks that had a lot of experience and were pretty well prepped to go into the college level. But what does it mean to have an authentic experience, and what do you mean by this is what I'm trying to build? Yes, in terms of musical content, but also what does the staffing look like, and what does what is there and what is not there? Who's welcome and feeling like they belong, and who's feeling a little less like more tentative, I guess, in their experience.
Sure.
So what is that authentic experience as it relates to U.S. music institutions and your experience through that as well?
Yeah, my path, Michael Nickens' path, I was just very blessed to have certain mentors that were always able to go out of their way to include not only people but modes of expression, encouraging me to start to study improvisation at an early age, sitting at a piano in 9th grade for the first time and someone saying, this is a blues progression. And this was my choir director, Ernest Johnson, and encouraging me in that form, and never really ever showing that there was ever a type of music that wasn't going to be welcome in some kind of way. And then it wasn't until later that I started to discover that not everyone felt that way. And, just getting out in the world, going to the different schools, encountering different types of teachers, not knowing how spoiled I was, kind of thing, and then on top of the openness to modes of expression and different genres and artists, on top of that, my main mentor coming up, Dave Porter, was my tuba teacher, and he exposed me to very standard tuba literature and Baroque music and classical music. And so with that combination of all those things, I was able to, I was encouraged to perform in the orchestra and perform in brass quintets. I was encouraged to engage the canon. And so and all the skills that, the sight reading and the music theory, and even from early on, understanding some sense of the more I can study about the conditions that the piece was produced in, the more I'm going to find I can get out of reading the notation or listening to the recordings and making my own performance. So then as I think about things like coming up through a church program and something that I've seen from time to time, particularly in the African-American community, vocalists don't always have to engage the notation in the way that, for instance, an accompanimental instrumentalist would. However, that vocalist can perform at the highest levels, someone who can listen, someone who can mimic, someone who can innovate, someone who can improvise, push their own boundaries and that kind of thing, and combine different things that they've had from the experience simply by listening and then producing. and they don't necessarily have to ever deal with the written page. However, once we start talking about music theory, so much of the way we speak about, for instance, common practice harmony, relies on the understanding of how the staff works and how we categorize and delineate what pitch is and how rhythm works and how those things intersect. So it's a difficult lift at the beginning. Particularly, I can understand psychologically. You go from being the top dog, and then all of a sudden you step into this music theory class, and the whole room is ahead of you, and you go from the top to the bottom instantly. And just what will that do to someone who we might have trouble retaining, even not because of the journey as a musician, but like, going to college is difficult, and there's lots of things to put together to make sure it works. And so if the main thing that student is going to go do feels like a barrier, they may have the resilience to deal with that. But if all of a sudden there's a family situation, a financial situation, a personal situation, now it's like, if they're not being fed by the thing that they came for, it's easier for those other things to get in the way. And I just want to chip away at that the best I can. I can't stand it when I start to think about, I'm going to kind of just like put together a little characterization of, think about the young African-American singer who got inspired by the community, the music community around their church. And that's sort of the only, when I say formal, I mean a place where people have put together an organized approach to making music. Not just somebody who is at home doing a personal do-it-yourself, but I'm talking about there's a room, and there's a piano in that room, and there's a stage, and there are mics, and the people have put effort into making a program. And that singer, like I said, that singer comes up and never truly has to engage notation. They are clearly on a path where they will be able to have a very successful life making music, as a performer, as a teacher, as a critic, or however they find their way through. And then they show up at music school, and then some teacher who just well, I'll put it like this. I don't even need to single anybody. The whole building is full of people who are qualified to teach notation and how to read it and how to realize it. Yet it might be difficult to find someone who is actually open to doing that work with somebody. They would rather somebody show up. It's like if in their mind the standard, or the collective mind, the standard is that is something that you should just be ready to do. It might be difficult for them to understand that they have made a decision to not include a whole swath of the population by making that choice. And for me, I in my saltiest moments, I make an accusation, but it's like it actually has some logic to it. Think about how long it was illegal for African Americans to read, and think about all the ways that they survived that anyway and continued to be the brilliant, innovative, intelligent people that any people are, and here's how it manifested here. So then an entire system of music making persists that doesn't rely on notation, reading, and then somehow now, instead of that being something that's celebrated, it is now the reason for I don't know, for a collision, I guess, of some sort. And then if that student, that potential student, that would-be student, I mean, they're still a student, doesn't find the access point, doesn't find the mentor, or doesn't have the personal wherewithal, some combination of those things, then we're just not going to have those students, and we're going to continue to not include an amazing, beautiful, enduring tradition of the planet Earth, and we're not going to bring it in to the resource and connect that with the resources of a giant successful university. It's like the shame of that is profound, and also it it's easy for me to just wag my finger at the idea of higher ed and saying you're not being who you're claiming to be. If especially with a word like university, that implies all things, all we're studying all things, and it's like except things we don't feel like studying or something, right? And to think that there's not valuable lessons to be learned from a different point of view and a different approach is just ridiculous and arrogant and all the things we could say about it.
No, I think you make very, very excellent points, especially like in terms of historically where people are in terms of access to education, in terms of the historical fact that you just mentioned on when people were allowed to go to school, when people were allowed to learn to read and write without having it have dire consequences. Those are all very important things. And in terms of what institutions are doing to enable people that are not coming with the same skill sets, but are coming with something of tremendous value, culturally, historically, across the board. It actually reminded me of when I was having this conversation with Mark as we were preparing for this. I come from Ethiopia, and in Ethiopia we have one, now maybe almost two higher institutions for music education. And the one that is the oldest, the Yard Music School, was founded around and built around Ethiopians that were educated during the Cold War times in the Eastern Bloc. So a lot of people going to Bulgaria, Poland, Czechoslovakia, Russia, and things along those lines. And they came back with completely a classical mindset. Like when you go to that institution now, it's Mozart, Bach, Schubert, Beethoven, and all their cousins and aunts that are on the walls, which is fine. No
Absolutely.
problem.
We learn a lot from that.
They're allowed to be there. You know, they did stuff, and we appreciate them. And they were, you know, jazz masters of their time, is how I like to consider them. But what was on the flip side of that was that in terms of developing Ethiopian art forms, in terms of developing what was traditional, in terms of developing our instruments, in terms of if it's not, we have our own ancient notation, which is like ancient notation, hundreds of years old, one of the first notations.
Beautiful.
And we've completely neglected that, which is something mind blowing. It was based within the like the church context, but outside of that, you can take it and see what else you can do with it and negotiate with the church on how to use it. But in terms of the instruments, how we had neglected them. And the biggest shock was when I went back. I lived outside of Ethiopia for a long time, but when I went back, one of the things did was go to visit that institution because it was where I first learned to play piano as a child. And it was mind blowing to find that they did not have traditional instruments as majors. They had them as minors. And one of the reasons was kind of what you mentioned earlier with the go-go example. They did not have accredited teachers to teach the instruments because there was no particular like institutional like administrative process to get that kind of accreditation and recognition through paperwork, which again, as a nation, I think is one of the biggest failings, to take something that is yours and to neglect it that much because you are stuck on education and music must look this way and must sound this way and must have these notes. There are many different notation systems in the world. Right. I'm sure people that are, you know, like that singer that you said, you know, she's singing there and the people are playing there and they have figured out a way. Another language maybe, but slightly there, different things have been figured out. And I think there's a lot to lose in that, and there's so much to gain if that kind of effort and time was given to say, how do we then fill in these gaps and enable people that are coming with different knowledge bases. So I guess the next question in terms of this experience on authenticity and music schools is, have you, in your experience, been in schools that have done it better, have done it well in terms of enabling that authentic experience to bring yourself, plus or minus your knowledges and plus or minus your status in society and how it may advantage and disadvantage you, whatever it might be? Like, have you in your own experience experienced something that was like, well, this institution is doing it much better, and what were the things that were going well with that institution? And then on the flip side, when you were like, man, this is definitely not the place for the majority of people to try to want to be. So can you give us a little bit of your own experience on some of these kinds of institutions and what that meant and felt like?
It always comes down to, you know, the individuals that are doing the teaching and doing the organizing. And I have truly been blessed with a path that served me well, even though I want more. But I it just was like I said, the strength of the marching band at James Madison, and all the years getting prepared to go. That was part of my undergrad as well. I went there for 1 year of undergrad before I switched to Manhattan. I would buy their recordings every year because of all the different fun things that were going to be on the recordings. What are the tunes? But really, I enjoyed the quality of the recordings and the quality of the performing. And then I sort of, in hindsight, realized how much I enjoyed the wide range of repertoire as well. I remember I made a post recently on their alumni page talking about how many different things I heard for the first time because that marching band performed it, and how many different directions that sent me in. So that was really great. But for instance, there, it was difficult for me because it's 2 hours away from the DC area. And for the most part, the only performing I was hearing were other students. And it's not that that's inherently, poor or wrong. I had just been so used to being around the DC area where I had instant access to the world coming through performing, and world-class musicians who many saturated with world-class musicians who lived in as part of the neighborhood even. So I was craving that, and that's part of the reason why I went to Manhattan. Manhattan was interesting in that it was more narrow, really just orchestra, opera, piano performance, very, very, very classical focused, and then there's also a very strong jazz program there. But as a tuba player, it was very difficult for me to cross that line because the way that they were organized around repertoire, the tuba was not a regular. In fact, I can't say that at school there was a single time I performed as part of one of the big bands. Now, another reason why that is, though, is because I hadn't really figured out that was something that I really wanted to do and could do. So I couldn't make the suggestions about repertoire or making certain alterations to arrangements or whatever. I'm sure it would have worked. And the reason why I'm sure it would have is because I spent a summer at the Henry Mancini Institute back when it was out in LA. And there was no issue getting a tuba in the big band there. And what's the silliest is the director of that big band was the same director of my big band at Manhattan. So it was just a matter of asking and talking about it, what made it happen. But even larger than the big band itself, in both directions, we were all put in combos. So that was my first really strong experience being the bass player in a combo. And then on the flip of that, it was a full orchestra setting as well. And we were playing, all sorts of, I guess in some respects, somebody would think of it maybe like a pops orchestra or a film score orchestra or something like that. But it was heavy jazz influenced, heavy fusion, rock, classical thing all mashed up into one thing. It just sounded like a contemporary television or movie score where not only is it the full complement of an orchestra instrument wise, but then there's also a rhythm section and improvisers, and the music, whatever the genre called for is how the music was organized around the drummer and the rhythm section, or more of a through composed polyphonic treatment of the full orchestra, or however it was, with a conductor and everything. So that was beautiful and wonderful and so much fun. And I love that I got to do that. And but there were other festivals I went to where I wouldn't have been able to have that experience simply because they wouldn't have brought the rhythm section in, they wouldn't have brought the improvisers in. And so other festivals were simply just orchestral repertoire, which was an amazing experience, absolutely. But like I said, it wasn't inviting in these other things. We would sneak it in because you'd play in a brass quintet, and it's so easy to for instance do an arrangement of something like New Orleans jazz, which works so well for brass quintet with the tuba and the trumpet and the trombone, and using the horn in many ways the way that a saxophone might participate. So that kind of thing kind of finds its way in. And once again, even there, as I bring that up, the response from the audience, everyone loved the Mahler and the Tchaikovsky that we played, but then we closed the concert with When the Saints Go Marching In, and an explosion of joy from the crowd. So it's like just a different. We're able to tap into something different. But like I said, we kind of had to sneak it in because it just so happened that brass quintet had the kind of players who were able to present that kind of thing and wanted to present that kind of thing. So then my time at Yale, that program is similar to what I was talking about Manhattan, but more focused on classical performance. I found one of the great mentors of my life, Willie Ruff, there. And in fact, I was just so blessed to get on the phone with him yesterday and so happy to talk to him. And he created what is called the Duke Ellington Fellowship at Yale. And that brought in, I would say, every jazz musician you could possibly think of at some point was on that stage at Yale doing a recital, doing a talk, performing with Willie, however it is. Of course, Willie's lifelong project of the Mitchell Ruff duo and all the things that they did worldwide and all their recordings. And so watching his documentaries, attending his classes, attending his performances, being able to interact with his performances, I was able to see in real time and experience in real time, one, a resilient, effective artist, activist, surviving in a situation where the resources, the scheduling, the funds, the mind share were not. It just wasn't. It could have been more of a friendly environment, in my opinion. It could have been more of a curious environment. Now I don't know any. I couldn't sit here and say anything that Willie ran into himself. You just sort of guess by watching. And like I said, something like the schedule. I remember, having a world class like a Clark Terry or something like that coming to perform, and then we can only do the thing at like 10 a.m. on a Saturday because we couldn't get the primetime slot, and that's fine. I mean, that could all just be that all could just be as simple as, well, what got booked first, and absolutely. But even in there, somewhere has to become a question of, well, what would we need to do to prioritize this? What would we need to do to leave rooms? It could be that the way that this came together was by opportunity of being close by, and we just were lucky enough to be able to put it together. And so how do we, there's just questions, and some of them literally just lead to the process. But if we can put our attitude there a little bit and understand that we could be doing more to help, then we might find that we might do something a little different to make that happen. Anyway, I tried to put together a project while I was there, and I played in brass quintets all through undergrad and then now through my master's, and I just wanted a different experience. I didn't want to think that chamber music could only be brass quintet for me, watching other instruments doing interesting combinations based on whatever piece was written. And so being that it was tuba, there wasn't enough repertoire for me to find my way to that. So my idea was, well, there's plenty of performing composers. Why don't we make an ensemble out of the composers, and then we'll just write our own chamber music? And then the beautiful idea for me, how natural and interesting it would be to have Willie Ruff be the coach. And I wasn't able to do it for credit. I couldn't use my chamber music credit for it. And it was like a difficult conversation with some of the faculty on why it wasn't going to be able to happen. In the end, once I had graduated out of there, I have spent the rest of time since then doing the thing that kind of wasn't allowed to happen at that moment. Like I said, for credit. Yeah, they wouldn't have stopped us from doing it. But once you can't do it for credit, it puts us in this place where now you're getting a hall at 8 a.m. on a Saturday because prime time is, taken up by the things that are for credit and our own mind share, and just really trying to get a really committed experience from all the members. If they are doing this as extra, it's going to start slipping whenever they need to prioritize other things. So then when I got to Michigan, I found a group called the Creative Arts Orchestra, and that is at its core a performing free improvisation ensemble, and not just musicians, but mostly musicians, but they're visual artists and poets and dancers, and I'm sure all manner of other things have been in and out of that group. And my first experience with it was, this is like improvised avant-garde, chamber music. Great, I can do that. I've played enough, as the term is, squeak squawk music, that I can come in here and squeak squawk all day. And then at some point, I just started doing a funky bass line as part of that, and I remember how much the energy changed, and I also remember discussions of how happy that something like that happened. And the longer it went, it spun further and further. We started to incorporate DJs and rappers, and the jazz musicians could find their way between this sort of like very expressionistic and abstract mode of improvisation, and incorporate very bluesy, very stylized, sort of genre specific. And then the idea started becoming how much fun it is of the juxtaposition of genres. So you had to then be able to show up polished, or at least fluent, within a genre, to be able to come and smash it together with something that was completely different, and the amount of time and approach that took, and it just proved itself more and more, that the idea of a pan-global approach to inclusion, anything that's on the globe, we're going to figure out how to include it. It's going to be allowed here. In fact, the more you can find the thing that we should have been thinking of and just didn't, that's going to be even more celebrated. Think about a great DJ who can throw some song on, and it's like, man, I haven't heard this. I didn't even think that we would be dancing to this tonight, and the whole room is just like, oh! And so it's like, somehow that same thing happens when a saxophone plays a certain figure, or the drum set, lays down a certain kind of beat. The same thing would happen. And so that led to, on my one of my dissertation recitals, all my recitals I did in school, I would go out of my way to include one of my own compositions if I could do it. And so I did some of this. One of the things that you would work on in this improv ensemble would be extended techniques. And so for me on tuba, I started leaning heavily into making mouth percussion and using the horn as an amplifier. And then also the multiphonics you can do by singing and playing, like you play the tuba in a standard way and you sing at the same time, and then you can do harmonies with yourself. And then thinking about being exposed to Bob McFerrin my whole life, Ready Roxy and Dougie Fresh and Rozelle, and hearing these amazing performing artists that were doing it all, like performing as an entire ensemble just by themselves with a microphone and their voice. And then I, instead of a microphone, had the tuba, and so it's like including that all together. For my first dissertation recital, I put together through composed but with improvisational aspects to it, a hip hop piece where I would rap and sing and play the bass line and play the percussion and improvise on all of those realms, all as one piece. And I was just talking to a friend of mine earlier this summer about that, and he was kind of asking, when did that happen, in my development. It's like I had realized that I had wanted to be a rapper from the first time I heard Dougie Fresh and Slick Rick on the show. Like that was it. and all my friends, and we all tried to do it. And I especially remember in elementary school beatboxing in the boys' room because of the reverb, and you could like get this really nice echo in there. And so we'd all, even if we'd have these sessions in there, even if they would only last 15 seconds, but we would just be in there and making beats, and then got to go back to class, and we would do that. And it was this sort of secretive, outside of the box thing that we were doing, but definitely felt a true sense of our own identity and our own community by doing it, and exploration and all of that. But I didn't give myself permission to incorporate that into my academic classical music making until I was at the end of my doctorate, and had, I wonder what would have been different had I come to it earlier and started exploring it earlier. But that's just in terms of the degree itself. The answer is it didn't matter. I've just spent time after that exploring that, and at some point in there, I bought myself some turntables, and the things I've done in the last few years, either this summer I did a series of duets, really just by putting my turntables on, playing a bass line over top of that, recording that, sending that around to friends all around the world, and then them sending me back the other side of a duet, and then I've just been posting these duets, these like, what are they? Are they jazz? Are they hip hop? Are they these fusion duets with different types of performers? And so that's one of the ways that it sort of matured. And another way is with a friend, Paul Fadul, that I grew up with. We made these little comedy. I'd say they're comedy videos, but they incorporate our performing on our instruments. He's a percussionist and me on tuba, both of us as vocalists, and they're these like hip-hop-y rap things about video games that we played when we were in elementary school. And so we're like rapping about these games and putting on costumes, and then we arranged the music from the games for our instruments and then made these multi-track recordings. And so I get to be a rapper that way. I mean, it's like I said, it's kind of more of a comedy thing than it is about being about hip hop. But it definitely draws heavily upon on a lot of hip hop and pays homage to heroes that we know. So it's like that's sort of my journey through my education and all of the ways that those places have done it well. And I'm not saying that that's the only places, but that's just the experience I had. I love it every time I find out there is a progressive rock program. Things I've heard about Berkeley, for instance. I love hearing about different folks who are studying hip hop, especially when they study it from not just a musical standpoint, but truly build a picture of all of the conditions that make the music what it is and why it exists, and how it affects the people that are involved and what the future of it is. I really love hearing about that and looking forward to moving in that direction myself. So making that commitment, I'd say, over time to back to what we were saying about credentialing, the future is going to be, we need to figure out how to find ways to make pathways especially in higher ed, so that we can incorporate more styles, more genres, more modes of expression, more practices, and have them live side by side. And in some ways, let them live as what they are, and in some ways demand that things mix as well. Both keep the practice alive and find the place where we can build mutual understanding, because these things are side by side.
Right. And I think this leads directly into the next question, because it's literally about how do you then make that possible, right? What does it take from the students? Is it student driven? Is it demand driven? What do the teachers have to do? What do the educators have to do to make this more possible? And on the flip side, what do the institutions themselves? What does it take? How do you adjust the curriculum? How does it become a better curriculum in these 4-year programs, or even pre these 4-year programs? What are the things that need to happen to foster more of these kinds of come as you are, come curious, push the envelope, any kind of combination is possible, like that kind of, because I think, I mean, on the one hand, music and the arts is where you're supposed to be pushing all the envelopes, right? It's
Right.
supposed to be about creativity. It's about looking at what else is possible instead of being stagnant in one way of being. It is about, you come from here and I come from there, and this means a new direction can be born. So this pan global approach to inclusion, I love it. I feel like it needs to be a bumper sticker somewhere. This pan global approach to inclusion. How can we actually foster that in these institutions? What do the students have to do? What do the teachers have to do? What do the administrations have to do to make it more possible for these diversity in genre and identity and experience to blossom, because it is richer for it. The institution will be richer for it. It'll probably pull on newer audiences as well, go into different spaces that maybe it doesn't naturally normally go to, because new things breed new things and so on and so forth, and there's a chain reaction. So what do you think are the ways that we can foster that kind of curious, open-minded, willing to
Right.
do it? Is it leadership? Is
Well,
it
it's
because you
all
said
the
like the
yeah,
same
it's
guy
all
here,
the
the same
above,
guy
right?
there? It's like it's a lot going on. Like if one guy here won't let you be flexible and it goes to Henry Mancini and he's also the different, what does it really take for institutions to be better at what they do?
Yeah. So I had an experience with a composition theory teacher at Yale, Joan Panetti, who is another one of my I look at was one of my great mentors, especially while I was there, and she was a student of Nadia Boulanger, who um, kind of had we one of the standard ways we talk about Boulanger is this composition teacher who inspired the sort of uh, kind of national voices, these like composers that we think of. So the Russian sound of like a Stravinsky or something like that, or the American sound of a Gershwin or a Copland. We sort of attribute her with kind of fostering that idea of bring up the music of your people in your classical music kind of thing. And I believe Quincy Jones also spent time and is part of that tribe of artists. And so Joan Panetti is, and I was in her class, and part of her approach to music theory is putting improvisation into your requirements for the class. And one thing I'll say is improvisation needs to be all over the curriculum, all over the place, because when we're improvising, we are mastering the things that we're talking about, and it is inevitable that our personal voice will come out some kind of way. So that's our cultural voice and our personal opinions and our the things that we love and the things that we've exposed to will inevitably come out in our improvisations. So without doing that, we'll always be recreating somebody else's written down improvisation, and that's valuable, but just not all of the picture. So that's one thing. So anyway, we were sitting there, and she was trying, and I remember the conversation. She was trying to say, "Can you do it less jazzy?" Right? And so I would play something else, and somehow I wouldn't have taken out the thing she was trying to get me to take out. And so I remember saying to her, you have to be more specific than that. You can't just say a label like jazz and say, don't do jazz. I need to hear something like less syncopated, less chromatic, something like that. Let's talk about specific types of tone colors that you'd prefer to hear, sort of a positive approach. Can you do it only using diatonic, non-chromatic approaches to pentatonic and I don't know, just whole tones, like things that we don't. Well, the whole tone's pretty strong in jazz, but what kinds of things could we do to make it sound less bluesy, I guess, or something, just and like I said, just let's get down to how are we talking about pitch, how are we talking about voice leading, how are we talking about rhythm, how are we talking about meter, and let's stay there in that realm, and then we can be specific and know what each other's talking about or not talking about. And we got there. I mean, it was all a very friendly and loving environment. So that I never felt I never felt like I was being punished. She was trying to get a specific thing out of me, and we were trying to figure out the language of getting there. And so therein is the thing I'm after. It's like, how do you even talk about a style if you haven't digested what it is? So if you can kind of sit there and say, yeah, it's this or it's that, you know, I know it when I see it, kind of approach to it. I just think that that's not quite achieving the demand of being the kind of leaders that we need to be in order to be educators. So I understand that there's not enough time on this planet to study all the things, but if there's at least an openness to even have just false curiosity, just forced curiosity, even if there's an openness just to that. Obviously, when I say this, especially to the pep band all the time, your false enthusiasm will become real enthusiasm, and you won't even realize when it happened. And curiosity works the same kind of way. And I guess there's also a thing where it's like, if we're sitting here saying there's not enough time to study all the things, then inevitably we have to admit that there's a subjective approach to picking our destiny. And so I think that admitting that is a profound thing, and the answer to get on the other side of it is, let's work on our ability to understand the objectivity of subjectivity. So it's like somewhere in there we have made objective choices, and if we can learn how to focus on what those things are, really have a crystal clear vision of what that is, be able to articulate what the objectivity of our subjective choice was, we can probably find ways to find common ground with the objectivity of other people's subjective choices. And then being able to break down into its elements, get down to the atomic level of for instance, music, talk about time, talk about timbre, talk about the way we approach organizing pulse and beat and meter, the way we organize pitch and the intersection of pitch and rhythm, use diagnamics, use different cultural tropes and things like that. And if we develop that language, we might find that we could apply it to all styles. And so instead of it being about sort of being in a mindset that so it's sort of like a ethnocentristic, I can't get this word out, where you're just so in the mindset of your culture that you may not even be aware that there's anything on the outside. You've sort of normalized what makes you instead of seeing it as unique to yourself and your group and your tribe and whatever. Music school, we so often just say that. We say music, we study music, but what we mean is we're studying European classical music. We're studying European concert music. There's music all over the planet that doesn't have a direct, strong connection to that because of the instruments, because of who the artists are and where you perform the music and why you perform the music, and thinking about all the music that happens outside of a concert hall, anywhere else. I enjoyed so much last summer performing at the jail for a GED graduation, and we had a great time, fun conversation. I can't imagine that any of them had ever been at a solo tuba concert before, and but it was just such a natural thing, because instead of somehow it being different simply because they're incarcerated, they're just people, and literally people from my neighborhood, and we just talk to them like I would have talked to them under any circumstances, and then the connection was lovely. And so they were there for a specific circumstances, different types of parties, different types of worship ceremonies, different types of protocol ceremonies, and just really trying to get into all the things that are possible in all of those settings, and then being really honest about how that doesn't show up in the concert hall, how that doesn't show up in a music history class, in a music theory class. And some of it is because, again, some basic assumptions. We are going to talk about music theory based on our ability to engage notation. And if many of these styles are based in improvisation, it's not that they can't be notated, they just haven't been. And so it'll take some time for people to just sit down and make some approximations and make some generalizations about how the music works, even though it's based in this idea that it's going to be slightly different every single time it happens, even within the same artist. So yeah, there's a fluency in all of that that needs to inject itself into the mindset of building a curriculum, leading a class, celebrating these skills when they show up. Sometimes a musician shows up, a student will show up that is ready to do that, but since they themselves are able to do things that their teachers aren't able to do, sometimes there's a little bit of a power struggle there. And the system itself, might hurt that student. No single person hurt that student, but the system itself will hurt the student enough that that student will not see themselves as a future teacher, for instance. And then now we've just lost the chance we had. Here's a person who's ready to go. We could hire them tomorrow, but that person's discouraged and finding their way to do other things now, just because of being discouraged in the different classes and the different ensembles or whatever. So, and I guess the last thing I could say that the institution could do is unlock the power of the composer, commission new works, set aside time in the halls and the classes and the different places on campus where music making can happen, and really encourage the composers to lead the conversation with their work, because any composer can just write something into the script anytime. And the more that exploration is rewarded, the more likely we'll be able to find strong ways to connect music making that isn't currently a standard thing in the way that we practice and the way that we teach.
Those are all awesome points. I see Mark is back into the screen here with us. But just some of the things that you mentioned on language, on improvisation, is part of the things that we should all do, because that does definitely, it forces you, you're right, it forces you to bring you to the mix. Improv is you, it's your soul, it's your language, it's your experience. I was telling, again, this conversation came up when we were preparing for this. I grew up listening to jazz. My parents from Ethiopia went to California, and they brought like a house full of records with them to Ethiopia. That's what they brought back, besides their PhDs. And I grew up listening to jazz all my life, but had never gone to school for specifically, I learned how to play piano, but it wasn't really that kind of jazz education, music education. I studied economics and government and ended up being a cultural performing arts work, that realm won over. And when I went to South Africa, I actually went for a semester. There was a school there, a music school, that was run by Darius Brubeck, Dave Brubeck's son.
Awesome.
And it was awesome. And they had like these really like 5 rand, which is, I don't know, a couple of cents, 5 rand concerts on a Wednesday evening that would bring in all kinds of people, which I thought was an excellent thing, because it's jazz, but it's the students also creating that platform for them to doing the things that you were saying, which was compose. They're encouraged to compose for that time. The audience was people that would be very nervous to come to the school, but because they knew it was 5 rand, they were like, all right, we're coming through. So that was an important point too. And when I did take some of the courses there, because I was like, this Dave Brubeck was one of my favorites. It's his son. Let's go do this thing. It was very important for me to understand that, yes, I can do the performance, but I can't speak the language. And so my teacher was humble enough to be like, all right, let's get it done. And so I think humility was, she was shocked that I didn't understand some of the languages that she was, because she's like, but you're doing it. And I'm like, okay, thank you for letting me know what it is I'm doing. But I don't speak your Latin. I just don't speak your Latin.
Right.
So that kind of humility, that willingness to say, all right, great, now let's just kind of connect. Because it's not a lot. It's not very difficult. And I think there's a lot to be said also about how technology can help you now.
Yes.
You know what I mean? There's like a lot of things that can help with. If it's about notation, you can probably sing it and it can probably approximate it to like 80%. Like there's a lot of ways I think that might also be a way forward in terms of removing some of these barriers. Of course, the barrier to first approach music school and apply for music school and enter music school and colleges in general, that is already a huge bag of chips to go through. But I think these are really important things, and especially the blinders that you mentioned, that subjectivity, the blinders, like, this is norm, but it need not be norm. And I think this is a great time to have that conversation, for Odyssey to having this like dialogue as well, and to be interested in this movement is this norm no longer serves the majority that is beyond what is
Yes.
in this package. So I think in terms of some of the recommendations for institutions, I hope y'all are taking notes. And I guess I mean the last question was about these foundational expectations of music schools. What are they doing? What are the foundational expectations that are striving to meet students where they are? What would that look like, and what does that feel like? And I don't know if Mark, you want to come in because I don't know if there are more questions that we need to deal with or any.
I think go ahead, definitely. We do have one question from Yana Nicole. Thank you, Yana. Which I think kind of relates a little bit to this. Maybe this is a jumping off point. She wanted you to answer, Doc, how to incorporate improvisation with middle school students without going too deep into theory. So that might be kind of a good jumping off point to go into the question at large.
Yeah, absolutely, because it does have to start way before.
Of
Because
course.
Exactly.
by the time you're an adult, and that was the experience also with the Ethiopian school that I mentioned, because of the fact that access to instruments, especially things like a violin and a piano and a tuba, tuba.
Right.
I mean, there are some instruments that are just really expensive to begin with to get
Right.
access to, and to begin with to even be around. I mean, who gets a chance to be around a bassoon? When was
Right.
the last time I saw one? Like I can't even
Yeah.
remember. So in terms of what would be the prep work from elementary school onwards on how we can make things more accessible, and I'm sure economics of countries and music programs suffer, right? Music programs suffer in schools, but I think it is a very important question. How can we prep ourselves better? What are some of the foundational expectations that will enable all of us to be?
So one conversation I love when I start working with a composer is on what are the essentials of music? Like what kinds of things, how many things can we take away and have it still be music? And and then at some point, because it's always a trap, because I know where I'm trying to lead them, I say even down to sound is not necessary for it to be music. And what? Big question mark. How? And it's like, and then of course there's the sort of like cliche approach saying, 4 minutes and 33 seconds, John Cage is music. It's like there's that, and it's like yes, that's not exactly what I'm talking about though. I'm saying you can appreciate and experience rhythm without sound, and the proof of that is just the rhythmic moving of your body. And so, if you grow up in a society that doesn't dance, you have cut yourself off from your most accessible music making. So if you have music teachers who don't dance socially or artistically, then that teacher may not be qualified to engage a diverse audience. It's just the truth.
So they
So
gotta dance.
if they dance, if someone so I took a trip to got to take a trip with my boys to Bolivia when we were young, and I don't speak much Spanish, but I had a very connected and meaningful time, particularly in social settings, because the small talk is not talking. The small talk is finding a partner to dance with, and so when somebody would introduce you to somebody, you would just dance together, and that's how you met each other. And there were all sorts of steps that they clearly are fluent and spent their whole lives doing that I had never seen before. And some of them I could do, and some of them I was finding my way to, we'll just say that. But on the humility thing, we all just knew that and enjoyed messing up and enjoyed learning and enjoyed trying. And as long as that's there, then all of a sudden you start to discover things. You're doing a certain type of step, and the experience of the timing of putting your foot on the ground, but then putting your weight into that foot on a different count, and just the complex rhythmic metrical thing that happens when you start messing around with just changing weight from one foot to the other, and the timing of weight on that foot versus when the foot actually touched the ground. And so much interesting stuff happens there. Again, I'm not talking about sound yet, but I can still say that I experience a downbeat and I experience syncopation in that. I can tap on myself. I can tap rhythms on my own hand. I can all, just flexing muscles and make all sorts of different things happen just in that realm. And so the reason I'm harping on that is because what I'm saying is let's stop thinking about the instrument as the gateway to making music. It's like our body is the gateway to making music. And if I could, it's like okay, we've all got amnesia and forgot how to teach music. I wouldn't even begin with an instrument. I would begin just addressing rhythm and just addressing pitch. In some ways I would put them together, in some ways I would keep them apart, but it would be dancing and hand and body percussion, mouth percussion, all that kind of thing, and it would be vocalizing. And so in improvising to get someone started, many times starting with call and response, so just literally mimicking, but then asking them to do something similar but different, and showing the different ways that they can change it, and little things, 4 counts, and just little snippets. My turn, your turn. My turn, your turn. Then, as soon as someone realizes that it's safe to make sound and not really even know what's going to happen, or safe to just hit something and find patterns, they will very naturally start getting wild with it as they get more comfortable, because they just needed permission to make the sounds at all. When we're in a concert band in middle school, that gets shut down. We only play when it's time to play, and we only play the thing that we were told to play. I was teaching at a summer camp. I was at my middle school. This is like I was in college, and there was one young drummer there. Like if you can picture it, there were 2 different bands, and it was a 2-week camp. And so I spent 1 week with the one band, and then I switched to the other band, and this kid was in that second band, so I had him the second week. The first week I kept hearing about this one problem kid. I kept just hearing about this kid this drummer who just was not staying on task. Clearly he's bored. Whatever. I kept hearing about him the whole week. Well, if you can be surprised or not, I walk into that second band that second week, and of course it's the one young black face in the whole room. And instead of it being noise, though, instead of it being off task, what I heard was a little munchkin that somehow was wise beyond his years drumming go-go drumming. He just knew that he knew it. He knew what to do. He was just doing it. And so instead of doing what the other teachers had been doing, or going and taking the drumsticks, holding the drumsticks, instead I just picked up another drum and just took maybe 20 seconds to just play some music with him, so that he knew that there was someone in the room who appreciated and understood him. And then that kid did anything I told him to for the rest of the camp. So sometimes the teachers would come down on him and he needed to shut up, and he'd look at me and I'd let him know, yeah, it's time to shut up. And then other times somebody would say something and it's like, don't listen to them. And I made sure I kept that communication going, because again, we were connected now. We knew something about each other. So that kid was bold enough to improvise on the drums because, one, he was engaged in a style that's based on improvisation, but 2, somehow had gotten or given himself permission to just do it. So that's the thing we need to unlock. How do you get someone to give themselves permission to try to take the risk of making something, especially being vulnerable in front of other people? It's like that's the thing we're truly dealing with. The technique of it is pretty easy. I'm gonna do a rhythm and then you do a rhythm, and then we'll get there, and then I guess another part of it is, for me, it was really strong when I got to the place where improvisation was put in place as performance. So it wasn't just an exercise we were doing, quote unquote, just for fun, just to fill up some time, just to do something novel or interesting or whatever. We are going to get in front of people and present this. And so now I'm looking at what I'm doing kind of in a different way, because here's a chance to, the first time someone had you read a poem or a speech in elementary school or whatever, it's like you want to get it right. And what does get it right mean when it comes to an improvisation? It's like, well, really I just want you to play with confidence, and I want you to not worry about it so much that you're crippled. Just make a thing happen. And I guess, this is something probably for a little bit older students, but it's like, always understand that no improviser feels like they're all the way there. Every improviser always feels like there's more they could be doing. There's better things they could be doing. Everyone feels like that. So keeping an eye on that and making sure that everyone understands that anything you do is okay, and learning how what we might consider a mistake or a failure is nothing like that. It's like you just learned something new. You learned either that you don't like the way this sounds combined with that sound, or you learned that if you don't keep your focus, you're going to go off track or something like that. Just, you learn things. And so it's like being able to coach somebody through that development. I think it's in there. But then again, to contradict what I just said, put it in some no risk environments. This isn't about we're going to get in front of the whole school or your parents. We're just doing this because it's fun, because it's worth doing. We're building ourselves out of these notes and rhythms and melodies and beats and whatever. We're just going to figure out who we are and what we want the world to be. And then if somebody wants to choose to make that jump to becoming a performer on it, then that gate is there, and we can open it for them and help them move in that direction. I hope that answers it. I mean, I think what I'd really like to do, especially with Yana, let's just talk about it forever, because we need to like build these practices and figure it out. And so don't get one answer from me. Let's talk about it infinity times, and we'll find our way there.
I think that would probably be like the best way to end this conversation, is that this is the beginning of talking about it infinity times, because I think all of the things that you mentioned, we are naturally singing by the time we're like, I don't know, 2 months, like 6 months old. We're naturally moving and dancing by the time we're one. We're not, it's natural. It's like part of our organic being to move, to sway, to have rhythm, to have all of this melody coming out of us. Before we're speaking, we're singing. Isn't there some kind of like quote? Before we sing, we speak. Before we walk, we dance. Before we write, we draw. I don't know.
Sure.
I don't know.
But isn't it? I mean,
But it is what it is. And I think there's a lot to be said about how, I think while you were talking, this whole idea of safety, like that kind of like that safe space and that safety to explore, that safety to be, that permission to be as you are and to come as you are. We're talking about even as an experience in the audience. Classical music audiencing is stressful.
yeah.
There's a certain degree of just stress that comes
Pe-
with.
People feel like an inauthentic audience member if they don't know when to clap or not clap even.
I'll have to tell you, because I come from jazzy and or communal and whatever, where you're like hollering and whistling
During
and
the performance.
encouraging people
Yeah.
during the process. And to hold it in, it's painful
Yes.
for some of us. It's painful. And then on the flip side, it's also in terms of thinking institutionally, like really, I'm sure this is again part of the let's talk about it infinitely, but how you become an educator, like the experience with the Ethiopians that did not know how to credential their people to have these masters of their traditional instrument be doctors. Why could, like, figuring out some kind of, what are alternative ways of credentialing? What is a new kind of model of music schooling that needs to happen? Why do a lot of people go into music school with this excitement and then suffer and then leave and cripple, like those kinds of questions around the kinds of teachers that are your teachers and how they get to be them, the kind of ways you accept and don't accept music students because of who they are. These are all conversations that I think can be deconstructed 1,000 times over.
I hope you get a chance to speak to Victor Provost, pan performer, composer, educator. He is in the middle of the journey that you're talking about, being a professor of pan in a place that, especially our school, the main pillars are opera and piano performance. Obviously music education as well. We have a strong jazz program, but the real things that are really thriving are classical piano and opera. And so where does pan fit into that? And he has figured out many ways, but we got more work to do. And
Absolutely.
that's my brother, and I'm going to help him figure it out. But I'd love to hear more about his perspective on that.
Absolutely. I think these are all the conversations that again, from what kind of students make it, what kind of teachers are there. The more diverse the educators are, obviously, people will come looking for you. I would be more comfortable being taught by you than somebody else that I just can't speak the same language.
Right.
Language matters.
Well,
I
you let
think
me know what you want to work on. We'll do it.
my
That,
fear of
that's
music institutions is coming through now. Like I've been like, I see you, but I don't know if I'm ready for you and you're ready for me. That I think is the truth for millions. I don't think it's
Yeah.
it's not a unique experience. I think it really is something that to be said about should I even bother? Like I mean, would they even understand what I'm saying? That's a lot to be said. And in language, there's a lot of power. So I think all of these points and the fact that it's an ongoing conversation. I'm sure that we've come a long way from who could be in music schools, but we're music schools to where we are now, and to the diversity of genres that are in them and the diversity of student body and faculty. But definitely, I think, this is a great conversation. Odyssey, good job for making these kinds of platforms happen because I think definitely it's the future has to be about widening these blinders and making more things possible and making it fun, making it fun because in the heart of music sometimes we lose that it's supposed to be fun and it's supposed to make you feel good as a teacher of it, as a student of it, as a performance of it, as an audience of it, and making it go places and saying, particularly now we're in this awkward place of pandemic 2020 in terms of what kind of audiences, how to diversify your audiences, the fact that the next time we'll sing together in choirs and big bands. We don't even know when those things are. So it might be the perfect time to have these conversations because we are reconfiguring so many other things. Why not this as well? Why not then say, all right, what else can we do? How else can we do it? With that, I'm going to give it back to you, Mark. Thank you so much, Doc Nix. That
Oh
was
my goodness.
awesome.
Thank you. This is exactly the kind of stuff I want to be doing. So I'm glad we got a chance to do it. I'm looking forward to whatever's coming in the future as well.
Absolutely. Thank you both so much. You were so wonderful today. Absolutely insightful station. Doc, if you have a couple minutes, we do have a couple questions from
Absolutely.
the fans. So we had a question from Christian Perez. Are there any classes you would say that should be mandatory in music schools to help unlock some of the concepts that have been mentioned?
It's interesting thinking about it in terms of classes, but some of it is just reimagining the classes that we already have. So, for instance, it could be that I'd say something like, if you can come through and not truly be, and I'm not talking about sort of touching it in an introductory kind of way, but like as a classical performer, you can go through and never truly touch composing. And you might take one class and then we say, okay, you had an experience composing or arranging. But it's a whole other thing when you are constantly in the practice of building your own projects. For me, that came early, arranging for the bleachers of my marching band in high school, or I also got a chance to write some music for the drama department and be in the pit for some of the plays. And so what it forced me to find, doing that, there's so many musicians, particularly like I said, the heavy classical performers, when they have their first improvisation experience with me, it can get so anxiety ridden that they are stuck. It can bring panic. And one of the things that I try to do in that environment is I just try to show them that they already can do the thing I'm trying to get them to do. I just need to get them to understand what it is I mean or don't mean by quote unquote improvising. In the first composition class, I'll say something like, composing means you take things that exist and put them together. Like, you are not inventing reality here. You're just putting a light on something and featuring that thing. A musical composition is a series of events in time. And I'll just kind of leave it there. And it's like, or sometimes I'll even go in, take it in further. I'll say an event or events in time. There's a musical composition. And it's like that wide makes it so wide. So it's like, I'm just taking the classes that already exist and just bringing these ideas in and sort of trying to make them happen. But if we can't get the syllabi to change, then simply in I'd say one of the things that I've always felt that music school is lacking in, we study pitch and pitch and pitch and pitch and pitch, and we do a terrible job studying rhythm. And so if I combine a society that doesn't dance with a school that doesn't teach rhythm, it's like, there it is. All we need to do is incorporate those two things in, and we will open ourselves up to wide swaths of musical expression across the globe. So good news is I'm actually building that class right now, and we'll have it online this semester for George Mason University. And it's taking all the things that I learned from teachers who taught me Dalcroze and rhythmics, improvisation, and taking a look at how that leads to improvisation and composition. So wish me luck. I'm putting together the little modules right now, and then we'll make this as open source material as we can make it, because I just like connecting with people too much to not want to share this.
That sounds great, Doc. Yes, absolutely share that class materials with us, with everybody who's been listening today to speak. I just want to go through a couple more things that
Absolutely.
were mentioned in the comments. Yana asked, "Can Victor be a guest speaker, please?" Yes, we'll make sure that happens. Don't you worry. Sharon Peterson writes, "Thank you for being an educator that gives permission to unlock. You make more than music when you are generous that way. You are growing the whole creative person." Doc, thank you for the impact you've had on so many lives, on so many kids.
I
going
appreciate
through the
hearing it.
program.
Thank you. And it helps me a lot to hear that. And don't underestimate the power of Sharon Peterson. She is taking care of the whole community, not just in music, but all sorts of ways. So it means a lot to hear it from her, and I'm so happy to have her friendship and be a partner as we work on things. And we'll talk soon, Sharon. Lots of fun things to talk about.
Absolutely. We have a question from Sue Reed. She asks, "How can we emphasize and support music teaching? Not as a, quote, backup plan B, as a paying gig for performers to justify your music degree. We can't get future musicians without music teachers."
That is a wonderful, wonderful question. And one of the things that I often I'll say it. It's sort of not on the party line, but I'm like, I hate the idea of music ed being a backup. It's like, I myself don't have any music ed degrees. All my degrees are in performance, with a secondary in composition. So, and then I'll say, I think I have the best music teaching job of anyone I know. And I'm not trying to disparage what people are doing in music ed, and I'm not trying to say that the people who are in those degrees are leading to the wrong place. But what I am going to say is, the academy takes all kinds of approaches, and if we only lock in that as the barrier to getting into a community to teach, then the practices that are valued in that system of the credentialing can only be responsive to the things that it was built for. So if there are blind spots that system is not addressing, then you're going to have teachers going out ill-equipped to deal with the communities that they're maybe going back to. Thinking about the way that my journey was I wanted to go out into the world and go to LA and go to Ann Arbor and go to New York and go to Germany, all the places that I studied, and then come back home and be the thing that I gathered these things and bring them back home and enhance myself with that. But I still wanted to be a leader in my community and make the thing that was for my community, not think of it as a colonial approach to, I'm going to go somewhere and sort of save the musical savages, right? Like people who don't have any culture, so I'm going to bring them culture. It's like, I want to go out and find the tools so that I can better understand the thing that we're doing already. And so if we could learn how to identify students, like encourage students in that kind of way, identify ways that we can help them become that, and outside of just simply making sure that they know the repertoire and the pedagogical practices, but they may have to go to their community and become the managers. They may have to fundraise and do the political advocacy and organize the teams that put things together and how do you get the facilities in place and how do you gather equipment. They need to become all of that, and even beyond that, have an idea that they're going to be maybe possibly doing all the composing themselves, teaching themselves how to teach certain things, and then on top of all of it, keeping a good thumb on the pulse of the reason that they're doing it and being able to critique how is it helping the culture and the society of their location and where it is. And it's like, what are they being for that community? What are they doing to that community? Like I said, being very careful to not have it was so great somewhere else I was and I'm bringing this to you mindset, but how can we make this place great? And obviously importing some things can be part of that, but also not wiping out what's already in place to make sure that you can have this thing that's from somewhere else.
Absolutely. Doc, we have one more question as a response to your self-plug. Jeff Smith asks, is it possible to audit your online class?
Well, for Jeff Smith, I need to make sure that he knows that he has access to anything I have freely. I love Jeff. He is one of my partners in just the war to survive. And in all the fun adventures that we have, Jeff Smith pulled a skinhead off of me who had just assaulted me when we were in Germany. So Jeff and I are connected in a profound way. Yeah, Jeff, we will talk very soon. Let's just get on a call as soon as we can, and we'll make whatever you need happen. I really just want to spend some time with you.
So with that, I think we'll leave it there as a first step in the conversation. That's not the end of the conversation. This isn't the end by any means. This is just the first step in that dialogue. Munit, Doc, thank you both so much. You were so wonderful today.
This was great.
Thank you for
My pleasure.
helping to make Odyssey a place for these kinds of conversations. So with that, I want to just briefly mention that we have an event coming up. Our next event is on Tuesday at 4 p.m. live here on Facebook at the Odyssey Arts. It's with myself, Mark Yershai, playing piano, and Milad Yousefi, an artist from Afghanistan. We are both improvising, myself in music, him in painting, to create a new piece of work live for you on Facebook at the Odyssey Arts at 4 p.m. Doc, are there any, as a last minute kind of plug, are there any sorts of programs that people can check out, support, donate to, that go towards the kinds of programs that you work with?
Whew. So some of the things that I'm interested in, like I said, it's all about producing your own things. I wasn't prepared to answer that question. I'm going to give it some thought, and I'll come back and we can put some links up. But what I will say for everyone to do, make stuff. Make something new and connect with other musicians and make music with your friends. Make things with other artists. I'm so happy to hear about the improvised painting and music thing. That's a right in the wheelhouse of the Creative Arts Orchestra and the work that we were doing there. So I'm so happy that you're doing that, and I apologize to you. We used to do that as part of what is now called the New Sound Collective, and just the way that the timing worked for me, I didn't continue pushing on it the way I used to, so you and I never got a chance to do that. But let's find the time to do that. And the same way I was talking about the small talk by dancing, let's also do that with improvising, and find our way to collaborations that way. And then stay tuned, as I'll come up with a good list of things that people can pay attention to that are doing some great work and are worth paying attention to.
Great. So we'll share that through Odyssey's, all of our social media accounts. We'll post that on the video description. We'll also be posting a recording of this conversation on YouTube, and so that'll all be in the links below on that video. Once again, Munit Mesfin, you can follow her on Instagram and Facebook. Doc Nix, aka Michael Nickens, aka The Green Machine, you can follow him on all sorts of platforms and accounts. as well as at music.gmu.edu for George Mason University. Thank you so much, both of you, and have a wonderful weekend. Take care.
Thank you. You too.
All right.